I'm going to begin, if that's okay. And we can talk about how we're all kind of schlepping by at the end, if anyone wants to stay for that. It's not a you did the work, you didn't do the work. It is more for my own sensibility to know who was able to see Danielle's intro video. Anyone? Okay. Then I'm going to do elements of it. Tonight, what I'd like to do is introduce the topic and then, hold on, we're waiting for more people to come in, introduce the topic and sort of summarize what Danielle Hartman's lecture intro is, since I think most people didn't look at it, and then go right to the text, ending hopefully with the last text we have is the IDF Code of Ethics. Remember, I want to tell you, this is not a contemporary class. This course was written about 5 years ago, I think. And just to review, we've been talking about nationalism and statehood and peoplehood. And as a sikum, what nationalism demands of us and what it doesn't demand of us. And now we're going to think about the morality or the moral implications of Jewish nationalism. So I'm going to go through, first, join me, if you would, in the bracha of La'asok b'divrei Torah. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kitshanu mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Thank you. So this is a little bit more lecture than we usually are, but I want to be able to summarize what some of the past points have been. And you're welcome to either take notes or think about how you learned this in the past weeks. I'm sorry that last week the Hanukkah celebrations were a little too much for me, so I needed to skip last week. Okay, so nationalism, I think we can say, entails a loyalty towards one's own nation that's translated into policies, actions, and responsibilities to support one's national interests. So you could think about that as an American or an Israeli or whatever nation you either choose or were born into, or you left and you joined another nation. But nationalism in and of itself means that there's some sort of loyalty. And I think last time, which was 2 weeks ago, we did talk about how though we can care about all, we also know that we care more about our own children. Maimonides does a job of defining this when he talks about how we do tzedakah. Anyone remember this piece of how he does tzedakah? So he does tzedakah in concentric. Edna, did you want to jump in? In concentric circles. So first you're going to care about those very much closest to you. And then you're going to care about your family, and then your enlarged family. And then he says you care about your city. And then, which is so interesting, you have the conversation of, do you care about the non-Jews in your city, or do you care about Jews elsewhere? And that's where the first kinds of conflicts come up when you are living in a nation state. So if I'm living in the nation state of New Jersey, do I care about New Jerseyans more than I care about Pennsylvanians? And then larger, why, this is what nationalism talks about, do I feel an affinity to care more about people who identify as citizens of the United States? Why do you feel differently than someone who identifies as a Mexican or as a Canadian? And I pick those two in particular because they are in the same landmass. And so there are just artificial boundaries that have made us into separate nations and nation states. So again, nationalism entails loyalty. Anyone have anything to argue about, or you're good with that definition? Okay. So what we learn is that it is the issue. Suzanne, there's someone trying to come in, but I don't know who they are. It is the prioritization of national interests over interests of other nations and their citizens, where the locus of criticism comes. So are we individuals, or do we care about our own nation, or do we care about global states? And I think that many of you can remember when you were either in high school or college, and people were talking about people who wanted to intervene in World War II and people who did not want to intervene in World War II. And one was not good or bad. They were different ways of looking at our relationship to globalism. Okay, so probably what we think is that there's a dichotomy between national prioritization and care for other humans and care for our nations is a little bit of a false dichotomy, because as a Jew, this is something that we did in the last week's text, we say everyone is created in God's image, so we have a connection to all peoples, and also we have a specific connection to specific peoples. So the question that we could ask, both in the United States and in Israel, right? Because both in the United States and in Israel, let's say when this curriculum was written and during the last presidency, we had issues with the prioritization of national interests becoming either discriminatory or fascist. And that's one of the questions we were trying to think about last time and the time before. How do you have nationalism that doesn't grow into a place of ultranationalism or even fascism? And I think as we end up in another presidential election in the United States, we will begin to ask those questions again. In Israel, those questions, and remember, we're not talking about the current war, but Jews and Jews in Israel, and the break that was seen in the last two elections in Israel between nationalism and ultranationalism. So if you were to define the differences between, in the Jewish state, nationalism versus the ultranationalist versus the fascist, how might you divide those? Nationalist versus ultranationalist versus fascist state. Anyone want to take a stab at it? If not, I will. So yeah. Judy, did you?
Well, I guess nationalism, if not taken to extremes, can be healthy. But I think once you get into ultranationalism and fascism, then you're not at a place of democracy or of a healthy society.
Well, you could
I mean,
be.
that's simplistic.
Right.
That's really simplistic.
And you could be at a place of democracy while having that democracy not be healthy. And I think we saw that before October 7th in the Israeli government, in the most recent Israeli government, which was democratically elected according to their democracy, and yet was ultra-nationalist and included maybe one or two parties, I would say one, that verges on the fascist, that verges on only our nation and only the rights of our nation. Interesting, because we will have that same debate again. And if you're wondering who, I'm talking about Smotrich and Ben-Gvir. Oh, I can't hear you.
No, I can hear that.
Sorry. No, it's clear what you refer to, but I was thinking about your first question was, how would you distinguish between fascism, ultranationalism, and nationalism?
Yeah.
So I don't know, but what comes to my mind, in fascism, basically the authoritarian, or I don't want to say the dictator, but the ruler is above the state or the nation or whatever you want to call it. The ultranationalist is definitely focusing on a limited or a certain concept of what they think the state's supposed to be, and this is the only way, kind of.
I think that's a great way to describe it.
And the nationalism, I want to be more lenient and more kind of sympathetic because of many dilemmas in the global world, that maybe it's patriotism kind of to your own, what you consider your own nation.
Well, yes, and we are saying, I think the argument behind this entire curriculum is that we as Zionists and as Americans believe in a kind of healthy nationalism. When it goes off the rails is when that nationalism takes too many steps either to the far right or far left and becomes right and far left. And in Soviet authoritarian communism was equally disturbing as political movements that took nations to the far right, like Germany during the Third Reich. Different, but disturbing. But on either sides of the political spectrum, disturbing. But nationalism, certainly, I mean, I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America. I have no problem saying that proudly. Stephen, did you want to make a comment?
Well, I had a question.
Sure.
There is a phenomenon that's been referred to as Christian nationalism. Would that qualify under the ultra-nationalism category?
100%. And why? You can figure out why, I'm sure.
Of course.
I can, because it's a narrow view of what is a United States citizen and what the United States should be, a very narrow view.
Correct. And probably.
But even more than that, to relate to Stephen's question, it's wonderful. That's why you mentioned before Ben-Gvir. The same you have in Israel too. It's like the religious aspect with a statehood. So obviously you have one truth that probably when you have one truth, it's extreme. And it's the same with Christian nationalism or Jewish nationalism.
Yes, ultra-nationalism, we would say. Ultra, right. And so I agree with both of you that the Christian right ultra-nationalists in the United States feel to me very akin to Ben-Gvir and Smotrich in currently in the state of Israel, in that they prescribe one way to live. It's not each for their own. It's not each citizen making their own decisions within reason. It's one prescribed way, which is difficult. So now we're going to a place where the sources that we're going to talk about tonight talk about who we are as people and our quest for happiness and how we attain a sense of happiness. And right, isn't that what we should be searching for? Maybe, maybe not. The Torah is going to say maybe not. What are our moral lines? What's in our pursuit of the attainment of prosperity and happiness? Where are our lines that we don't go behind, that we don't go after? So what happens when our own personal or someone else's personal wishes go against national interests, safety and security and well-being of one's citizens? So we're going to just now go away from the nationalism back into what the Torah thinks we're doing here in the world. Okay, is everyone ready to study text? So can you bring the, Seth, did you have a comment?
I just had a question before we close out the previous discussion. How do you, maybe you got into it when you talked about Maimonides, how do you distinguish between love of Jew versus nationalism? In other words, independent of Israel?
We didn't talk about it this time. We've spoken about at other times that we have concentric circles of caring, and there is a continuum, certainly on the screens here, of people who feel more kinship towards all fellow Jews and people who feel more kinship towards all peoples. But there are and certainly I'm not going to make that decision for you, nor could I. You have to, as a individual and as a human and as a Jew, figure out, the sentence in Pirkei Avot, Im ein ani li mili, if I am not for myself, who is? Kama? Ukshe'ani la'atzmi ma'ani. But if I am only for myself, what am I? So much ink has been spilled over at various times in one's life. Who are you? Which groups are you spending more of your time on? And the way we conceptualize this really is that the first commitments you have, and the words that we used here were encumbered by. The first people you're encumbered by are your parents, and then your children and your grandchildren. And then it moves out from there. I'm going to go very quickly and ask for just quick comments so then we can go study the text. This was all in the introduction that Danielle Hartman gave to these texts. So Eleni and then Moshe.
Yeah, I just was thinking as you were talking that I think there's a distinction between the fellow feeling we have for others who are like us, concentric circles of belonging, and nationalism. I think nationalism is very much a politically defined notion. And for sure, there's overlaps. There can be tremendous overlap between nationalistic feeling and fellow feeling with some others. But I wouldn't say that the overlap is total. I find it helpful to sort of conceptually make that distinction between nationalism as a kind of politics and the fellow feeling we have for people and peoplehood. And, we as Jews can feel for our brothers and sisters in Israel, but I don't think I would call myself a nationalist. Anyway, I'll stop there. Just wanted to.
Yeah, I want to just throw back to you the challenge of thinking about what it means, not in terms of Israel, but as an American, and the kinship that you might feel when an American is challenged. And the place that this comes up most is when Americans are attacked. Like, it's easier actually to think about this in terms that are less heated, meaning not Judaism, but in terms of our own sense of being Americans, right? Like, what does it feel like, or what did it feel like when an American was killed because they were an American? And so we all have the experience of what it felt like during 9/11. And think about, and maybe you didn't, but I feel like many people felt a kinship kind of relationship because people were killed because they were Americans, which that's.
Make a quick follow-up. Is that all right?
Yeah,
I lived in Greece for many years, and I was frequently told, you're not a typical American. So on the one hand, that was supposed to make me feel good, but actually it was very offensive. And I basically didn't, I just didn't really engage with it at that level, because the implication was Americans are bad, you're not bad, so you're not a typical American. But I still think that that's more about fellow feeling and, connecting. Yeah, so I'm just curious how others think about it. So thank you. Thanks for listening.
Okay, if we had one or two other comments, or we'll go on to the text. Okay, so Edna, Judy, and then we can move on.
Very shortly, I think I hear, like last time also, that some people, and I was thinking about why they're doing it, because I didn't think this way. And it's interesting that nationalism with him, it's kind of like being loyal to a nation and its symbols or its. And I was thinking about nationality more like maybe going back to Hegel, or maybe even some of Jewish philosophers, that when we talk about nation, in Hebrew, Ummah, right? So it gives me more that the connection is a solidarity and being a part or belonging even to the culture, to the language, to the tradition. So it's not necessarily territory or political. It's more a belonging to cultural, I would add also religion, because what is religion? It's a different question. But it's part of my identity, to what I was thrown into this world. It's a group. So this is my nation. So that's why I don't see it so much as I'm a nationalist. It means that it's only Israel. No, it's my Ummah. So the Ummah can be part at the Jewish Center and part in Beersheba. So it's the same Ummah.
Okay.
This is for me.
And what?
Like Hegel, like the philosopher Hegel.
But people in both the United States.
No, I know.
Or Germany or wherever you are, there is a sense of healthy nationalism, and that's what you're describing.
Yes.
Not the negative pieces, the ultra.
Right. Okay, fine.
Yeah. Okay, Judy. And that's what actually we're trying to make the distinction between that right now in the state of Israel, there is nationalism, and there are people who are ultra nationalists. And those people are a little bit scary to a lot of us. And then there are the people who are not just ultra nationalists, but take it one step further and border on particularly fascist kind of notions. We have those in America too. We know, we see what's going to be running for president soon. Okay, Judy, and then we're going to go. And Judy, sorry that your son's not running for president. I could guarantee that most people in this Zoom would vote for Josh Shapiro.
Just a question that I don't expect answers right now, but that I'm just throwing out there. On the question of the concentric circles, do you think that we would have given a different answer on October the 6th than we would be giving now post October 7th? When it comes, I mean, not the first circle of family, but when you were talking about, circles of, let's say local Jews and then local people and then national Jews and national issues and then, Jews worldwide, would those circles be totally different since October 7th now for American Jews?
I mean, I hear where you're going with it. And I asked that question recently, like what has changed for you since then? I don't want to get into that till later, which we can, but I dare say that I think that even on this particular Zoom, I'm looking around knowing what some people's political orientations are and knowing that I think some people's have changed and some people's have not. And I think that's fine. I think there are definitely folks who are globalists here. And there are folks who are much more nationalists and there are folks at every point in the continuum. And I think that we are a multifaceted community. I think in the United States, we've seen more identification with Judaism or with Jewish culture, Jewish community. I'm not sure that people who already were identified, if their views particularly changed. Okay, I think if anything, let's say all the people on this Zoom or most of the people on this Zoom are people who are shul people. You've been around a while. I think there are a couple people in our midst maybe who've started to walk through our doors since October 7th. But I think that most every single person on this Zoom is someone who's been thinking about these ideas your entire life or most of your life. You're serious about this stuff. Okay, let's go to the first text. And I think this is a text that you are really familiar with. So God planted a garden in Eden. I'm going to do a little bit of the reading because I want to go more quickly to get to the other ones that are, I think, a little bit more controversial. Garden in Eden in the east, and placed there the man whom the Lord had formed, and from the land God caused to grow every tree. And there was a tree of the knowledge of good and bad. And then what happens? We get expelled from the garden. But the idea of leaving Egypt, leaving slavery, was this idea of we're going to get ourselves back to a garden-like existence. an existence where there are 7 species of beautiful fruit, and there's ways to live off the land, and there's freedom. Okay. And that's what we see in this next text. So can someone read the Devarim text, the Deuteronomy? Ki Adonai Elohecha miviacha el eretz tova, but read it in English.
Where is it?
It's number 3. Text number 2, indeed the Lord your God blessed you in all your wanderings, watched over you, and made it so you lack nothing. Really to say we leave Egypt, and what happens? All our needs are taken care of in the desert, meaning you leave Egypt, you leave this narrow place, Jewish people, and you go back into a place where you lack nothing. What is the place where you lack nothing? The Garden of Eden. You're going, the narrative of the Torah takes you back into the place where you have everything. So now we're at number 3. Could someone read the number 3 for us?
I'll read it.
Thank you, Jane LaGrange.
For the Lord your God is bringing you into a good land, a land with streams and springs and fountains, issuing from plain and hill, a land of wheat and barley, of vines, figs and pomegranates, a land of olive trees and honey, a land where you may eat food without stint, where you will lack nothing, a land whose rocks are iron and from whose hills you can mine copper. When you have eaten your fill, give thanks to the Lord your God for the good land which he has given you.
Okay, what does this sound like?
Well, it's Eden.
Yeah, it sounds like some utopia that I've never been to that just is as good as, right? It seems pretty good. So now the next text, right? It's the Jewish, all the peoples of the world leave Eden. We end up in Egypt, which really means, what does Egypt mean? A narrow place, right? This is how the Torah sees us. And then we get to go back, and even in the desert where we're walking towards this Eden type place again, we have everything we need. So now, once you have everything you need, what else does it say in Dvarim and Deuteronomy? You want to read? Thanks, Debbie Brett.
Well, it says that when you've eaten your fill, give thanks to the Lord your God for the good land which he has given you. And then it goes the other way. And it says, if you obey, I will enjoin upon you this day, the Lord your God will set you high above all the nations of the earth. Now that's certainly a nationalistic phrase.
Yeah, that's why it's here. That's why we're bringing it up. That's why, remember, this is not how we live. This is not but this is our founding document. The document that the Jewish people go back to and go back to, go back to. It's not law, but it's certainly lore.
Mm-hmm.
The lore here is, I'm bringing you to this land. All these blessings are going to come upon you because you're going to observe my commandments, which, by the way, what do we know from the prophets and the Jewish people when they live in the land? They never observed God's commandments, right? They're always being yelled at by the prophets for not doing any number of ethical or ritual commandments. But this text does say, and I am elevating you above others. Now, it doesn't do the next step, really, or the step that I just took of, and so you're better than other people, but one could certainly entertain that. One could certainly see that you have a different identity.
And that's always been an issue where non-Jews have been accusing Jews of believing that they are superior to all others.
Well, because we actually teach that.
Yes.
We teach the notion, right? What's the notion called in Hebrew for all the Hebraicists? What?
What was the question?
What's the word where we teach that we are maybe a little bit different and better than other people?
Segula.
Yeah, skula.
Bechira, Sgula.
Skula is the term that we use in our national tradition. Segula. And that term has certainly given us some solace. I think 2 ways. Anyone want to guess what the 2 ways are? You heard one of them. What one that you just heard was other people then believe that we think we're better than everyone else.
Mhm.
But worse is when we believe we're better than everyone else. When we actually believe this, as opposed to believing there are many nations in the world, and each one has their own sense of being skula for something or chosen for something.
And if we don't behave in accordance with the law, then and also with respect for all that has been given to us. And I see this as a anthem for protecting the environment. That we need to protect the land. It's not just protecting our people, but the land as well.
Yeah. So I want to get to the Isaiah, but maybe I will skip this Talmudic piece. I'm not sure. Okay, then we will do it. Okay, Rabban Gamliel sat and lectured. So now we're talking about the 5th century. A woman is destined to bear, he means children every day. You should all have a look of shock on your face that this is in the Talmud. For it is said, the woman conceived and bears simultaneously. But a disciple scoffed at him, quoting, "There's nothing new under the sun. I will show you its equal in this world." He went forth and showed him a fowl. On another occasion, Gamliel sat and lectured, "Trees are destined to yield fruit every day. So there should be fruit every day." But a certain disciple scoffed at him, saying, "But it is written, there's no new thing under the sun." Right? This is no new thing under the sun. Come, I will show you its equal in the world. On another occasion, Rabban Gamliel sat and expounded. Palestine, meaning the land of Israel, is destined to bring forth cakes and wool robes, for it is said, there shall be a handful of corn in the land. But a disciple scoffed at him, "There's nothing new under the sun. Come, and I will show you their equal in this world." He went forth and showed him morels and truffles and robes. And so, okay, what's the text coming to teach? Anyone baffled by the text, or do you think you have an idea?
I'm baffled by this for sure.
I'm baffled.
Just that there's an idea of Mashiach site. I don't know.
Yeah, there's this idea that we will come into the land and everything will be provided. This is a time when they're not in the land. They're not going back to the land. They haven't been in the land for like 400 years at this point. But our people are going to be so good that our women will give birth every day. That is seen as, the ultimate infertility, which is for them good. Today, obviously not a feminist statement, but for them, everything, our women, our trees, our truffles, everything about the land and the people that inhabit the land, the Jewish people, will be better, will be like the Garden of Eden. And this is going to be when? It's going to be at a time of the Messiah. How do I know that? I know it from the next text. Can someone read me this text from the beginning of 1st Isaiah? When it says in the days to come, actually the Hebrew is in the end of days. The Hebrew is v'haya ba'acharit hayamim, so in the end of days,
Afterwards.
meaning when the time of the Messiah comes. Could we have a new reader? Someone want to read?
I'll read.
Mickey Mendelssohn's going to read?
Okay, no problem.
Mickey, you're on mute.
Yeah, and I just lost my text.
Oh, I'm sorry. It's number 6.
You can just let somebody else read because I'm trying to find it.
Okay, Beatrice, you want to read?
Okay. In the days to come.
And just remember, the days to come is code for in the time of the Messiah. In Hebrew, Acharit Hayamim, the end of days, time of the Messiah.
Okay. In the days to come, the mount of Adonai's house shall stand firm above the mountains and tower above the hills, and all the nations shall gaze on it with joy. And the many people shall go and say, Come, let us go up to the mount of Adonai, to the house of the God of Yaakov, that he may instruct us in his ways, and that we may walk in his paths. For instruction shall come forth from Zion, the word of switch pages. Okay. The word of Adonai from Yerushalayim.
And you guys know this text in Hebrew. Ki mitzion tetzei Torah, davar Adonai miYerushalayim. Now it continues, v'shafat.
Okay. Thus he will judge among the nations and arbitrate for the many peoples, and they shall beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation shall not take up sword against nation. They shall never again know war.
I feel like this is one of the most difficult texts we can read, because it is saying that in the end of days, when the Messiah comes, is a time when everyone will recognize our God.
Wow.
Why is it so hard?
So what do I know about the nations of the world? What do I know about Migdal Bavel? What do we know about Migdal Bavel, that incredible story about the Tower of Babel? That there's so many nations, we don't speak the same language, we don't worship the same way.
But the Migdal Bavel was in our world. We are talking here about Acharit Hayamim, so.
Okay, but Acharit Hayamim is in this world. This world turned into a messianic world. What makes it messianic is that we all, not only that we all get along, I could see, for me, messianic would be that we're not going to make war one to the other, but this is saying something much different. It's saying the end. Moshe, did you try to go? Were you talking?
Yeah, it's saying that not only that everybody's come to our point of view.
Yes.
Well, that's not realistic.
I know. That truly would be the time of the Messiah.
But this takes you also to the Mishnah before the Talmud. En chadash tachat hashemesh. So in our life, it won't happen anyway.
Okay, maybe, but this is showing that what will be the next Gan Eden, right? Remember, our beginning text is the Garden of Eden. The end text, the end of days, is supposed to be like the Garden of Eden. And Isaiah's prophetic vision is that we will not make war anymore because everyone will agree with us. It's interesting to see where it's coming from. Okay. They go on. There's one of the most beautiful. Yeah, Judy?
Well, I was just going to say it's sort of the flip of in Christianity that when the end of the world comes and Jesus comes back, we all have to witness him and say he's really the Lord. So then everyone will worship that way. So it's sort of a flip side of that. That's two totally different things, thinking at the end of time it will be about them.
Yeah, although the one thing I would say is that many philosophers believe that as a monotheistic religion, that Christians believe that their worship of Jesus is actually worship of one God. So that gives us less problem, right? That's when I was studying a text this week, or looking at a text this week, where we know that one of the really most offensive things that one could do is shvichut damim, right? Spilling blood. What's the other one? Yeah, being a heretic. So being an idol worshiper. The rabbis don't consider Christians or Muslims idol worshipers. They consider them one God. So the Christian narrative and the Muslim narrative wouldn't go against Isaiah. Isaiah would just think that that's their interpretation of monotheism, but it's still the one God. They would have problems with like all the Hindus in the world and the Buddhists and the pagans and the Zoroastrians. larger picture. So let's do the last Isaiah, because this is my favorite. Yeah, Eleni.
I was just thinking that maybe the rabbis of the Talmud would also disagree with this Isaiah text. I mean, isn't there a scene, correct me if I'm wrong, because I remember things from different times, that the rabbis in the Talmud think of the Olam Haba, the end of the days, when everyone is arguing in the study hall in Olam Haba. So this notion that the ideal thing is that we should all think alike does seem to be, unless I'm wrong, it could be wrong, in contradiction with one of the strands of rabbinic thought, which is that in Olam Haba we will be arguing truly for the sake of heaven.
Well, right, you'll be arguing for the sake of heaven, so that would be about arguing to bring God's presence into the world. But I think maybe what you're talking about is this notion of Chevelei Mashiach, where it's the birth pangs of the Messiah, that before the Messianic times come the worst troubles.
Okay, maybe that's for another time. And
Yeah.
But let's just put a pin in it and hold it over. Because this all having to agree, I think, is not something that we would.
Well, not agree on everything, but certainly agree on Shamayim. Agree on the idea of God. Yeah, I mean, I'm agreeing with you. I think it's a little kind of outrageous to think that the whole world will get to that point. All right, I'd like to go on if that's okay.
Yeah, thank you. It's a great text.
Not you. There's a couple people's hands raised. Can I ask you to just write your stuff down? Because I'd like to get to the Maimonides text, but I want to just, this Isaiah text you can't not do. But a shoot will grow out of the stump of Jesse, of Yishai. That's us. That's the Messiah. A twig shall sprout from his stock, right? The Messiah comes from the line of Yishai. The Spirit of the Lord shall alight upon him. What will the Messiah be like? A spirit of wisdom and insight, a spirit of counsel and value, a spirit of devotion and reverence for the Lord. He shall sense the truth by his reverence, not judge, nor decide what his ears hear. Thus he shall judge the poor with equity and decide with justice for the lowly of the land, strike down the land with the rod of his mouth and slay the wicked. Justice shall be the girdle of his loins and faithfulness, the girdle of his waist. And then the beautiful verse, Lo yareu velo yashchitu. The wolf shall lie down with the lamb. The leopard will lie down with the kid, the calf, the beast of the prey, all of them together. And there'll be a little boy herding them. They won't need a big person. In all of my sacred mountains, nothing evil or vile shall ever be done. For the land shall be filled with devotion to the Lord as the water covers the sea. This too is our inheritance in modern Israel. Nothing evil shall be done in my name. Hard to hold, right? Nothing evil shall be done in my name. Okay, let's do the Rambam, because now we're going to get into stuff that's really interesting. Could somebody volunteer to read the text number 8? Thank you, Judy, the mother of a rabbi.
So the Isaiah, I think, is especially interesting in light of the comment about Christianity, because that's the Hebrew Bible text. Everybody knows that Christians hang their hats on because they assume that that's talking about Jesus. Okay, Rambam.
Yes, except they don't read the next part of the text, which then I too, when I read that, I'm like, oh, that's a wise man, peace bringer, the person who wins the Nobel Prize. You could write it about them. Maybe that could have been Jesus, who knows? But they don't read the next part, which says there shall be peace in the world when the Messiah comes.
Right, they skip that. Okay, Maimonides. In that era, there will be neither famine or war, envy or competition for good will flow in abundance. Envy or competition for good will flow in abundance, and all the delights will be freely available as dust. The occupation of the entire world will be solely to know God. Therefore, the Jews will be great sages and know the hidden matters, grasping the knowledge of their Creator according to the full extent of human potential. As Isaiah 11:9 states, the world will be filled with the knowledge of God as the waters cover the ocean bed.
So this connects right to the text before. How do we seek happiness in this world? Like Eleni says, we sit around and talk Torah. That's how the rabbi's conception of the end of days is not to go back to the Garden of Eden and have no troubles, but to go back to the Garden of Eden and have the trouble of interpreting Torah with each other. So I'm going to skip over 9 and go to 10. Judy, you want to keep reading?
Sure. Our sages commanded us to visit the Gentiles when ill, to bury their dead in addition to the Jewish dead, and support their poor in addition to the Jewish poor, all for the sake of peace. Behold,
Okay, so actually I think it's really important that we read that phrase in Hebrew. Mipnei darkei shalom. All of this. So our sages are saying, you might think it's important, by the way, to visit the non-Jews because you think it's a value in the world. That every person's created in God's image and that it's an important value, right? The rabbis in Maimonides' time in the Middle Ages, when the Gentiles weren't so great to our relatives, right, were running and having crusades against us, the sages said, you know what, it's okay. You need to visit the Gentiles. You need to bury their dead. You need to support their poor, all of that for Darchei Shalom. What's Darchei Shalom?
As of peace, to
The
keep
way of peace.
Ways of peace.
Shalom Bayit.
I think they might be telling us, you do this to keep the peace. You don't do it because they are also created B'Tselem Elohim. You do it so that they don't do bad things to you.
That's what the intent is.
That is.
I mean, what we know from things that are written around this, that may not be how most people use this text today, but that certainly was the intent of the text. The intent of the text was make nice to the non-Jews because you don't want to get killed. They're living in the village next to you and they have power over you. It's not how we like to read this text. We like to read this text in a non-historical way. We like to read this text saying that, oh, look, our rabbis want us to make peace with each other. But if you look at what was going on in history at that time, that's not why they wrote this. They wrote this to keep you alive or your ancestors alive. Interesting, right? Okay, I'm not going to do 13. Maybe let's do 12. By the way, before we do 12, what might 11, not 11, what might 10 make you think about if you live in the United States?
Might make you think about assimilation.
Okay, tell me why.
Well, because when the Jews came to the United States, there was a big movement towards assimilation into the American society, which is a Christian society. No?
I mean, I believe that's true. I don't think that is what's taught in schools. I think they don't teach that. I think that we learn that through our own life experience. Right? In public schools, they're going to teach that this is a land for everyone. It's about religious freedom and blah, blah, blah. But I think that your life experience and my life experience, and maybe most of the people in this Zoom, or many, not all, would say, yeah, it's a Christian country. So,
well, I think the rabbis were very strategic in their thinking. And I think the tact of assimilation was strategic on the part of the Jews that came to the United States. I don't think it was an accident.
right. In fact, what was the number one thing that rabbis did to help that? I'm going to tell you, how many of you grew up at synagogues where there was a hashkama, an early morning minyan on Saturday mornings?
My
So
sister has that at her
If they
shul.
could go to work.
So they could go to work, right? So my first shul had that because it was all working class folks, and the service started Saturday morning at 6:30 in the morning, Moshe, because they wanted people to be able to come and do their Shabbat davening and go to work. What's the other note that so many of you yearned for, the 8 o'clock Friday night service? But what's the 8 o'clock Friday night service a gift from? It's about the assimilation into American society. It's you go to work a full Friday.
Right.
And then to the synagogue late. And it was rabbis who did that and put that together. So you're right in that we're not talking ancient rabbis, modern rabbis who helped that assimilation. What do you think the Darchei Shalom could help us with today? That idea of Darchei Shalom, the original idea. Not the one of you want to keep the peace in a unicorn kind of way, but
I think it takes us to what we talked in previous meetings too, that Kol Netivotei Shalom, it's also the empathy and the sympathy to the other, because this is the only way you can create peace.
I hope so. I think that's where
universal way. I'm looking at it as a universal way to the goyim and to everybody else. This is the meaning of Darkei Shalom, Netivot Shalom, right? Peace, paths of peace.
right, so that you look out not just for yourself, but for others as well. Okay. We don't have a ton of time left, so I want to go, hold on a second. To the background reading, if that's okay with you all. I certainly
Okay.
think it's at the very end. It's number 1.
Okay.
So nations are interested in their citizens having some sort of happiness, the pursuit of happiness in American terms, right? That's what you are given, the pursuit of happiness. In Torah language, what we're given is the opportunity to look back for that Eden, that Garden of Eden time, or that time where we can all be studying Torah, or that time where we're all on God's holy mountain, like in Isaiah. And then you have to govern. And then when you govern, you put your ideals into motion. And so what does the national state of Israel do? They have an army, right, to defend its people. But their army also has a code of ethics. This is the revised code of ethics that I believe came about in 1993. It was rewritten from an earlier code. And so I want you to hear about where its red lines are in this quest for national identity. So what's the mission of the IDF? Maybe an Israeli can read it. Any of our Israelis want to read it? IDF mission?
I can read it.
Thank you.
Okay. By the way, one of the professors who is part of this committee, I used to be his assistant when I was young, Professor Kasher. His name is Professor Kasher, so let's see if everything here is kasher.
It's kasher. Yeah.
Yeah.
And the guy who helped redo them was Professor Moshe Halbertal.
Yeah.
And so Moshe Halbertal is who I learned this stuff from. He was also a professor at Hartman, but he helped do the redo. Okay. But kasher. Yeah.
Kasher, very kasher.
Wait, what did you do for him?
Oh, I was in my previous life. I was at the philosophy department teaching logic, symbolic logic, philosophy of law and ethics. So I was his assistant and some others. Okay, IDF mission: to defend the existence, territorial integrity, and sovereignty of the State of Israel, to protect the inhabitants of Israel, and to combat all forms of terrorism which threaten the daily life.
Good. Anyone have any questions, comments on their mission?
I have a comment.
Yeah.
I watched the video for the lesson, and this actually solidifies, I forget the
Talbecker.
presenter's name. Yeah, thank you.
Dr. Talbecker.
Talbecker, when he said that the whole purpose of the part of the mission for the protection of Israel and anyone, in so many words grafted in, was the pursuit of happiness for mankind for the good of justice and righteousness. And he backed it up with the Tractate Shabbat of safety, security, prosperity, and well-being. That's what I get from it. I don't know.
Okay,
For
so
the
what Lana's talking about is if you go to the Hartman course document, the I Engage, there is a political scientist named Dr. Tal Becker who works in the government with issues of ethics, but he also is a negotiator, and he was negotiating from Oslo on behalf of the government, and he is the speaker in the video. So if you end up wanting to watch the video for class number 6, you could skip first 29 minutes. The first 29 minutes are about Rabbi Hartman and all of the texts that we went through, and go to the last 20 minutes, which is Dr. Tal Becker, on speaking about like what the IDF is doing and how they defend this sense of nationalism, not ultranationalism, just nationalism. Okay, so let's talk about the IDF spirit. Actually, that is too much background. Go for a couple paragraphs down. The IDF draws on 4 sources. See where that is? The tradition of the IDF and its military heritage as the Israeli Defense Forces. The tradition of the State of Israel, its democratic principles, laws, and institutions. The tradition of the Jewish people throughout history, and universal moral values based on the value of and dignity of human life. So this is what it's supposed to be based on. And
so
these are what?
No, it's so large, it encompasses everything. You cannot go wrong. It's universalism, it's Judaism, it's nationalism, and it's democratism. So,
and it's also the universal value, the dignity of every human being. And what we know, and this is why I was going to end with how are you feeling? What we know is that we're in a hard war right now. And this past Saturday night, I don't know how many of you saw that, Sachian, the head of the IDF took responsibility in one small way for some big mistakes that happened last week. That's first. We hope they're not one point of a fascist government is that they never admit their mistakes. The IDF has been admitting its mistakes. That's a good first step, right?
Not only that, he emphasized the dignity of human lives, that you are not supposed to shoot anybody that have a white flag, even if it's your enemy. So,
right. And he said the soldiers that did this were wrong.
Right.
What that thankfully shows is that they are going back to the values that are in this text. So I thought that we could, in light of last week, just remind ourselves the incredible difficulty that the army has right now when there's people that are terrorists that are camouflaging themselves as civilians. And at the same time, they have the job of living up to these basic values. So what are the basic values? I think we're just going to go on to the basic values now. Defense of the state, its citizens, and its residents. So that's a hard one right now, right? The Jewish people had a big failure on the day of October 7th, and we're all stinging from it still. Because this first, the defense of the state, its citizens and residents,
was broken.
It didn't happen. It was broken. Love of the homeland and loyalty to country. I think that is happening and also will continue to happen. I think as the inquiries go forward in the next few days and weeks, we'll see more of people coming to question and also a tightening of how procedures are. Human dignity. The IDF and its soldiers are obligated to protect human dignity. Every human being is of value regardless of his or her origin, religion, nationality, gender, status, or position. So how many of you saw the pictures last week of the Palestinian men who were without shirts and handcuffed and kneeling?
Everybody.
Yeah, well, some people don't read. Some people watch their mental health, Moshe, and don't look at the news, right?
Well,
yeah, but it upset all of us, right? Yeah, it upset everyone. So much so that the Tzal's spokesperson, Kanrikas, has been talking about it. Talking about this line and saying that and giving and saying we regret having to do that. Why was it done, by the way? Anyone remember what he said? They were afraid that the men who were turning themselves in would have suicide bombs on them.
But I think today and yesterday the pictures were different. They did have some
clothes.
Yeah.
Yes.
But it's a risk. It's a risk.
It's a risk. And it also reminds us how difficult the Army of the State of Israel has it right now to both try to maintain its national interest and try to do so while maintaining human dignity.
And their own lives.
Yeah.
Come on.
Yes. Yeah. Right. One terrorist bomb, one of those people, and they're all gone. So I want to say that I know it is so hard for people to look at the pictures. And I also know that it's so hard for our nephews and brothers and sisters and friends who have kids in the army. It's hard all around. What I would hope is that our government in Israel maintains its nature as a government of nationalism and looks out for its national interests, but doesn't go over to the side and become a government of ultranationalism or of fascism. And we walk those lines. It was really good to see the folks who speak for and run the army, and that the head of the army didn't have the spokesperson get up and say we made a mistake. He did it himself. There were other members of the government who didn't do that, but the head of the army did. And that should give us some hope.
And you had another example today. The chief of the army was kind of scolding Ben Gvir, telling him to judge the soldier who sang Shema in the mosque, because the army stood up against it and they are going to discipline them, whether in a military trial, but they are going to discipline them. And
I didn't see that news yet, but that's very interesting. That's
Ben Gvir is telling the chief of the army, I hope that you will let them stay. And then the chief of the army said, you don't tell me what to do. This is the army. We have our ethical codes and we will follow them, and etc.
Which it's amazing to watch the heads of the army, the people who've been in the army as career, turn against the ultra-nationalist, even this guy fascist members of the government. That's a hopeful thing. So I want to end the formal part of the class right now and say I thank you all for being here and thinking about really hard issues. And I want to